Hello everybody, welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we shall be analyzing the Hindu newspaper dated 16 June 2021 of the New Delhi edition. The topics to be discussed today have been presented on the screen. Time stamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. Let us begin our today's discussion. This particular article appears on page number 7. The article is titled as Not Cooking with Gas. This article shall be important from the perspective of GS Paper 2, Polity and Governance, particularly under the subsection of Schemes and Policies for the Poor and Vulnerable sections. This particular article here basically discusses various concerns and challenges with respect to the Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana, which was launched in the year 2016. Hence, from the perspective of the prelims examination, one should know various details of the Ujjwala Yojana. For example, what is the objective of this particular scheme? Who are the beneficiaries covered under this particular scheme? Which government ministry is implementing this scheme, and so on. As far as the mains examination is concerned, from the perspective of the mains examination, one should be aware about the achievements, benefits, challenges with respect to this particular scheme and how to address these challenges. As you can see, in UPSC Mains 2018, already a question has been asked with respect to the progress made by India in providing access to affordable, reliable, sustainable and modern energy for all. Accordingly, in the UPSC Mains examination, one could expect a question related to the concerns and challenges with respect to Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana. Accordingly, a mains question for your practice here could be, do you think Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana has been able to fulfill its stated aim of reducing the energy poverty in India? Give arguments in support of your answer. So if you look at the demand of this particular question, this question requires you to discuss both benefits as well as challenges with respect to Ujjwala Yojana and then conclude as to whether Ujjwala Yojana has been able to fulfill its stated aim of reducing the energy poverty in India. Ideally, in such questions, what you must do here is, once you identify the benefits and challenges, you could say here that to a certain extent, this particular scheme has been able to fulfill its stated aim, but there are still certain loopholes which need to be plugged. And then you can conclude your answer by giving certain strategies in order to plug these loopholes. Now, this particular question can be asked for 10 marks in the UPSC Mains examination, and accordingly, with respect to benefits, challenges, and how to address these loopholes, you should probably have around 2 to 3 points. That alone would be sufficient enough. So, before getting into these aspects of Ujjwala Yojana, let me get into the background and discuss about the energy poverty in India. See, according to World Bank, there is a direct correlation between access to energy and human development. If people have access to energy, such as say electricity or say clean cooking fuel, automatically it will lead to human development as well as increase in the GDP growth rate. For example, if people in the rural areas have access to electricity, automatically this will lead to increase in the educational outcomes. This will lead to increase in the health outcomes of the people and so on. Similarly, if the women in the rural areas have access to clean cooking fuel such as the LPG cylinder, then women need not have to spend huge amount of time in collecting the fuel wood. So the time which is saved here can in turn be used for more productive economic activities. Similarly, if we give up burning of chulhas in the kitchens in the rural areas and start using more of LPG cylinders, automatically we will be able to bring down the indoor air pollution. So as you can see, there is a direct correlation between access to energy and human development. That is why Sustainable Development Goal 7 seeks to provide for affordable, reliable and sustainable energy for all. However, the problem in case of India here is, not only are we facing the income poverty, but apart from income poverty, we are also witnessing the energy poverty, which means that a large section of India's population still do not have access to energy. And if they do not have access to energy, obviously we will not be able to promote human development. Now, for example, according to the Economic Survey 2018-19, even though India accounts for 18% of the world's population, we use only 6% of the world's energy. So there is a disparity with respect to access to energy in India. Similarly, the per capita energy consumption in case of India, this is hardly around 1/3 of the global per capita energy consumption. Similarly, in the year 2016, only 62% of the households had access to clean cooking fuel in the form of LPG cylinders. So this energy poverty right now, it is considered to be a major hindrance before India in promoting human development. So one of the most important initiatives taken by the government in order to reduce this energy poverty is the Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana. Apart from this particular scheme, obviously the government has taken a number of other initiatives as well. Please do let us know in the comment section as to what are the other initiatives taken by the government to reduce the energy poverty. Now coming to various details about the Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana. Now let's say there is a particular household in a rural area that wants to switch from chulhas to the LPG cylinders. So let's try to understand as to what are the costs involved in switching from chulhas to LPG cylinder. First and foremost, a household will be required to pay for the security deposit. Secondly, the household would be required to pay for the LPG cylinder. Thirdly, it will be required to pay for the gas regulator. And nextly, it will be required to pay for the cooking stove. So obviously the cost which is involved here is quite high, and this higher cost can be a prohibitive factor for a number of households from switching from chulhas to the LPG cylinders. Hence, in order to reduce the initial cost of getting the LPG connection, what we have is the Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana, which was launched in the year 2016. This particular scheme basically provides for a deposit-free LPG connection, wherein the beneficiaries are not required to pay for the security deposit amount. Apart from that, the beneficiaries are also provided with a financial assistance of rupees 1,600. This financial assistance of rupees 1,600 is basically provided for getting the new LPG cylinder as well as the gas regulator. As far as the cooking stove is concerned, in order to get a cooking stove, the beneficiaries here can avail interest-free loan from the oil marketing company. So whichever oil marketing company is providing for the LPG connection, such an oil marketing company can provide for an interest-free loan to a beneficiary, and through that loan, the beneficiary can purchase the cooking stove. The beneficiaries initially under this particular scheme included only the BPL families, but later in the year 2018, the coverage of this particular scheme was expanded, wherein apart from BPL families, this particular scheme now includes even the poor families, particularly those poor families which do not have the LPG connections. The LPG connection is given in the name of an adult women member of a poor household, and these poor households are identified through socio-economic caste census. So please do understand here that initially this particular scheme covered only the BPL families, but in the year 2018, the coverage of this particular scheme has been expanded to include even the poor families. And most importantly, this scheme is implemented by the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas. Now coming to the achievements of this particular scheme had sought to provide for 8 crore LPG connections by the end of March 2020. However, this particular target was achieved much ahead of its schedule in September 2019. Secondly, when this scheme was launched, the overall coverage of LPG connections was hardly around 62%. But in the year 2021, according to a statement released by the Ministry for Petroleum and Natural Gas, the coverage of LPG connections has increased to 99.5%. So overall, this particular scheme has seen a remarkable and phenomenal success in terms of expanding the coverage of the households for the LPG connections. Now, building on this, in the budget 2020-21, the finance minister has announced that 1 crore more LPG connections shall be provided under this particular scheme. So overall, this particular scheme to a large extent has been able to address the energy poverty, improve access to clean energy, and bring down the indoor air pollution. Now, why this becomes important is, according to World Health Organization, approximately around 5 lakh people across India are dying because of the indoor air pollution. In spite of its remarkable success, even today, the Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana faces some concerns and challenges. And these concerns and challenges have in turn raised question mark over the success of this particular scheme. For example, according to a report published by the Comptroller and Auditor General, the average refilling of LPG cylinders by these beneficiaries is hardly like 3.4 cylinders on an annual basis, which means that these beneficiaries as such are getting the deposit free LPG connection for the first time, but they are not continuing to use the LPG cylinders on a continuous basis. Instead, what they're doing is they are switching back to chulhas. This can be understood from the fact that these households are using only around 3.4 LPG cylinders on an annual basis. Obviously, a household cannot survive only on 3.4 cylinders on an annual basis. So this clearly shows that they are switching back to chulhas. Question is, why are they switching back to chulhas? Obviously, there are a number of reasons. First and foremost, the government of India is providing for the subsidy on the LPG cylinders in the form of direct benefits transfer. This we call it as a PAHAL scheme. Now, in spite of the subsidy provided by the government of India, the cost of the LPG cylinders is quite high, because of which some of the poor households are not able to refill the cylinders. Apart from that, we must understand here that in the rural areas, the poor households have access to the cheaper alternatives in the form of agriculture residue, cow dung cakes, and so on. Apart from economic factors, certain cultural factors have also come into play. For example, people in the rural areas have a flawed perception that food, if it is cooked on chulhas, it will be more healthier, tastier, and good for health in comparison to the food which is cooked on the LPG cylinders. So this flawed perception is also influencing the people to switch back to chulhas. So how can we address these concerns and challenges? First and foremost, we would have to adopt behavioral economics into the design of this particular scheme. In fact, this was a recommendation given by the Economic Survey 2018-19. According to the Economic Survey, we would have to nudge or influence the peoples towards usage of more of LPG cylinders and nudge the people to give up the chulhas, for which basically we can adopt two-pronged strategy. First and foremost, in a positive manner, we must inform people about the benefits of LPG. Secondly, we must come out with large-scale advertisements highlighting about the negative impacts of chulhas. Secondly, we would have to reduce the cost of LPG cylinder, particularly for the poorest of poor households. In order to do so, basically we can take the support of the design of National Food Security Act. Now, under the National Food Security Act, basically the households are categorized into two types, that is the priority households and the Antyodaya households. The Antyodaya households are considered to be the poorest of the poor households. Now, these Antyodaya households are provided with higher amount of subsidized food grains in comparison to the priority households. Similar to that, under the Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana, we can provide for the higher subsidy amount to the Antyodaya households to purchase the LPG cylinders. And last one is to challenge the gender stereotyping. So particularly there is a perception that has been built up in India that only females must cook the food. And such a flawed perception is in turn putting a lot of pressure on the women members in a particular household. Hence, going forward, we also need to encourage the male members to cook the food. So basically, there is a need to challenge the gender stereotyping in order to ensure the success of Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana. So these are some of the important aspects which one should know with respect to this particular article. Please go through this particular question and respond with the correct answer in the comments section. With this, let us now take up the next article. This particular article appears on page number 6. The article is titled as The Invisible Tax. This article shall be important mainly with respect to prelims under the subsection of Indian economy. See, recently the inflation numbers for the month of May 2021 were published. According to latest numbers, the wholesale price index has increased to a 25-year high of 12.9%, whereas the consumer price index has increased to a 6-month high of 6.3%. In this regard, this particular editorial here discusses as to what factors have contributed to the increase in the rate of inflation recently and why it is a matter of concern. As you can see, the chapter of inflation is quite important for your upcoming prelims examination. Repeatedly in previous year prelims, questions on various aspects of inflation have already been asked. See, as far as this particular topic is concerned, one should be aware about various aspects such as the measurement of rate of inflation in terms of wholesale price index and consumer price index, the difference between headline and core inflation, the concept of inflation tax, and that of the base effect. And that is what precisely we will do as part of the discussion of this particular topic. So first and foremost, we will understand as to why there is an increase in the rate of inflation in May 2021, why it is a matter of concern. Through this, we'll also understand the concept of base effect as well. And then we will come back to solve these 4 prelims based questions for the practice. So coming first to the reasons for the increase in the rate of inflation in May 2021. As you all must be aware, inflation as such can be measured both at the wholesale level as well as a retail level. WPI measures the inflation at the wholesale level, whereas the CPI measures the inflation at the retail level. WPI is published by the Office of Economic Advisor, whereas CPI is published by National Statistical Office. The base year for WPI is 2011-12, that for CPI is 2012. While measuring the WPI, we take into account different categories of commodities. We take basically 3 categories which include primary articles, manufactured products, and fuel and power. Out of these 3 categories, the highest weightage is given to the manufactured products. CPI is measured in terms of different categories which include food and beverages, pan, tobacco and intoxicants, clothing and footwear, housing, fuel and light, miscellaneous, which basically includes various services such as education, healthcare, transportation, and so on. The CPI rate of inflation gives the highest amount of weightage to the food and beverages category. Now, what this means is whenever there is an increase in the food items, obviously there would be an increase in both WPI as well as CPI. But the increase in the CPI rate of inflation would be higher in comparison to the WPI rate of inflation. This is simply because CPI gives more weightage to the food products. Taking the same logic, since WPI gives higher weightage to the manufactured products, if there is an increase in the manufactured products, the increase in WPI would be more than the increase in the CPI. So having understood the basics, let's understand as to what factors have led to increase in the WPI. First and foremost, there is an increase in fuel and power category, wherein the rate of inflation is as high as 37% in the May 2021. This is predominantly because of the increase in the global crude oil prices. As the cost of petrol and diesel has increased, because of which even the transportation cost of the manufactured products has also increased. So once again, this has led to increase in the wholesale price index. So in a way, we can call this as a kind of imported inflation, which means that inflation is basically taking place because of increase in the import prices of petrol as well as diesel. The next and most important is the concept of low base effect. Low base effect has also led to a drastic increase in the wholesale price index. So what exactly is this base effect? Now, before understanding the concept of base effect, let us first understand as to how actually the rate of inflation is measured. Now, let's say you want to measure the rate of inflation of a particular commodity X for the month of May 2021. In that case, what we will do here is we will compare the price of this commodity in May 2021 with the price of this commodity in the corresponding month of the previous year, which means in this particular case, we will be comparing the prices in May 2021 with the prices in May 2020. Accordingly, as you can see, the rate of inflation would be 33.33%. Now, how have you arrived at this particular figure? Now, this is calculated as the prices in the current month minus prices in the corresponding month of the previous year divided by prices in the corresponding month of the previous year, which is 150 into 100. So, this would be approximately equal to 33.33%. So this is how the rate of inflation is actually calculated. Now observe very carefully here. Can I say that this rate of inflation that you are getting in the month of May 2021 would be in turn dependent upon this value of denominator or the base? If the value of this denominator or if the value of this base is lower, can I say that this rate of inflation would be higher? On the other hand, if the value of this base here, if it is higher, can I say that this rate of inflation would be lower? Now, for the sake of example, let's consider a scenario where this base value is lower. Now, let's say this value is equal to rupees 100. So, in this case, it will be 200 minus 100 divided by 100, which into 100%. So, this would be equal to 100% rate of inflation. So as you can see, as the base value has got reduced here, my rate of inflation has increased from 33.33 to 100%. Similarly, let's say here, if the base value has increased to say rupees 200. Now in this particular case, 200 minus 200 divided by 200 into 100%, my rate of inflation would be equal to 0%, which means now my rate of inflation from 33.33% has dropped down to 0%. And why has that taken place? Because my base, my denominator in this particular case has increased. So, base effect is a phenomena wherein the rate of inflation in a particular year is in turn dependent upon the rate of inflation in the previous year. If the rate of inflation in the previous year is very high, the rate of inflation in the current year would be lower. On the other hand, if the rate of inflation in the previous year is lower, then the rate of inflation in the current year could be higher. So this is simply the concept of base effect. In order to further simplify this concept, we can look at this particular scenario 1 and scenario 2. In both these scenarios, the price of this particular commodity X is rupees 200. But if you look at the rate of inflation in the first scenario, it is equal to 33.33%. But the rate of inflation in the second scenario is equal to 81.81%. Now, why do you think the rate of inflation of this commodity X is different in these two scenarios? Obviously, this is because of the base effect. In this case, a higher base effect has led to a lower rate of inflation. In the second scenario, a low base effect has led to increase in the rate of inflation. In order to further substantiate this, you can look at the WPI rate of inflation for the month of May 2021. As you can see here, the overall WPI rate of inflation in May 2020, this was actually negative category. This was minus 3.37%. Whereas now it has increased to 12.94. And why is that? Because the base here was very low. That is, the WPI value in May 2020 was low, because of which the WPI rate of inflation in May 2021 is very high. And as you can see here, the highest rate of inflation is on account of fuel and power category, wherein the rate of inflation is as high as 37.61%. This is followed by manufactured products and then the primary articles. Now, as far as the reasons for the increase in the CPI rate of inflation is concerned, this is predominantly because of increase in fuel and light category. This is once again because of increase in petrol and diesel. Next one is increase in certain food items, particularly egg, which has experienced a rate of inflation of almost 15%. Edible oils, which has experienced a rate of inflation as high as 30%. Then the rate of inflation in certain other commodities such as fruits, pulses, etc. Now, so far, especially during the first lockdown, which was imposed last year, the prices of some of the commodities had increased. And this was predominantly because of the supply side constraints. So basically, we are not being able to provide for various goods and services, and that is why their prices had increased. Apart from supply side constraints, this time the CPI rate of inflation has also increased because of increase in demand. So right now, not only are we witnessing supply side inflation, we are also witnessing the demand pull inflation as well. This can be seen in the fact that there is an increase in the prices of various services such as health, transport and communication and so on. So in order to give you further clarity, you can look at this particular table which highlights about the CPI rate of inflation in May 2021. And as you can see here, there is an increase of almost 12% in fuel and light category. Similarly, the miscellaneous category, which includes services such as health, transport and communication, etc., has also experienced a higher rate of inflation. And overall, the CPI rate of inflation has increased to a 6-month high of 6.30%. Now, why should we be concerned about increase in WPI and CPI rate of inflation? First and foremost, some of the economists have highlighted that probably India could face stagflation in future. Now, what is stagflation? Stagflation is combination of two terms, that is stagnation plus inflation. This is basically an economic phenomena which shows a decline in the GDP growth rate accompanied by higher rate of inflation. So last year already the Indian economy has registered a negative GDP growth rate, and now slowly the rate of inflation in the Indian economy is increasing, because of which economists have highlighted that India may soon witness stagflation. Secondly, see, whenever there is an increase in the rate of inflation, RBI would invariably increase the policy rates such as repo rate. By increasing the policy rates, RBI would be able to bring down the rate of inflation under control. But here, the times are difficult. Now, already the Indian economy is facing the economic slowdown. On top of this economic slowdown, if RBI decides to increase the policy rates such as the repo rate, then we would not be able to revive the Indian economy. In fact, increase in policy rates can lead to a vicious cycle of economic slowdown. So right now, the dilemma before the RBI is to cut the policy rates or not. If the RBI reduces the policy rates to promote economic revival, it can lead to a higher rate of inflation. On the other hand, if the RBI increases the policy rates to control inflation, this can hamper the economic revival. So this is the dilemma which the RBI is going to face. Nextly, as the WPI and CPI rate of inflation has increased, the burden on the people with respect to purchase of goods and services has also increased. And as the people are required to shell out more amount of money to purchase goods and services, people's disposable income would reduce. And if their disposable income reduces, automatically the consumption expenditure, which happens to be the major driver of Indian economy, would also reduce. Hence, this increase in rate of inflation can actually prolong the economic revival. Now, coming to a practice question, the first practice question here is, which among the following best describes the concept of inflation tax? See, inflation tax refers to a decrease in purchasing power of currency, which in turn affects the people who hold cash during the high rate of inflation. So basically, it is a form of penalty on the people who hold cash when the rate of inflation is higher. In order to simplify this concept, let us take an example. Now let's say you have rupees 3000 with you in the year 2019. Now you have basically two options as to what to do with this rupees 3000. One, you can buy say 1 gram of gold, or you can continue to keep this rupees 3000 in the form of cash. Now let's say by the end of next year, that is by the end of 2020, the rate of inflation in the economy has increased by 10%, which means the value of gold which you have bought, the value of this gold has also increased by 10%, which means now the value of this gold in the open market would be say rupees 3300 because it has increased by 10%. But if you look at the value of this particular cash, the overall purchasing power of this cash has got reduced by 10%. So this is a kind of penalty on the people who hold cash when there is a higher rate of inflation. So inflation tax as such has nothing to do with tax, rather it's a form of penalty which falls on the people. Now coming to second practice question, which among the following can lead to greater divergence between headline and core inflation? See, headline inflation measures the inflation in all the categories of goods and services, whereas a core inflation does not measure the inflation in the volatile commodities such as food and fuel. So basically core inflation does not measure the rate of inflation in food and fuel prices. So whenever there is an increase or decrease in the prices of food as well as fuel, automatically the divergence between headline and core inflation would also increase. So the right answer here would be D. Now coming to practice MCQ number 3, as I've already discussed about WPI and CPI, the right answer to this particular question would be 2 and 3 only. As far as practice MCQ number 4 is concerned, the right answer to this particular question would be B. That is, rate of inflation in the present year depends upon the rate of inflation in the previous year. Now, similar to the concept of inflation tax, we have a concept of inflation premium as well. Please try to search about inflation premium on your own. Try to understand as to what exactly is inflation premium. And in case if you have understood this concept of inflation premium, please provide the explanation in the comment section given below. The next article appears on page number 7. The article is titled as Needed a Full Disclosure on the Electoral Bonds. This article shall be important from the perspective of GS Paper 2, Polity and Governance, particularly under the subsection of electoral reforms. This particular article carries out a critical analysis of the Supreme Court judgment on the electoral bonds, which it had delivered in the month of March 2021. Hence, from the perspective of prelims and mains examination, one should be aware about various aspects of electoral bonds. From the perspective of prelims, one should be aware about the working mechanism of electoral bonds. And as far as mains examination is concerned, you should be aware about the benefits and challenges associated with the electoral bonds. So before discussing these aspects related to the electoral bonds, let us first get into the background and understand the rationale behind the introduction of the electoral bonds. See, basically the political parties need money for a number of purposes. The political parties would need money in order to propagate their political ideology. They would need money in order to carry out the campaigning for elections, to meet their administrative expenses and so on. So basically the political parties rely on the donations from the individuals as well as companies. Now we need to understand that whenever the individuals as well as companies make donation to the political parties, first and foremost, these donations, it should be in the form of white money and not the black money. Secondly, when the companies and rich individuals make donations to the political parties, we must ensure that these rich individuals and the large companies, they must not be in a position to influence the policies of the political parties. So if they give money to a political party and if the political party comes into power, then obviously the political party would try to make policies in order to benefit such rich individuals and the companies. So this obviously would lead to the growth of crony capitalism. Nextly, we need to ensure that if a particular company is making donation to a political party, and if such political party does not form the government, rather if another political party forms the government, then these companies should not be victimized, which means to say that companies should not be victimized by the ruling government or the ruling party for not giving them the donations. So overall, we need to ensure that there is adequate level of transparency in the funding of elections. Sadly, this was not the case before the year 2016-17. For example, according to a report published by Second ARC, a large number of corporate entities which had donated money to the political parties, they were trying to influence the policies of the political parties, and those corporate entities that did not donate money to the ruling party, these corporate entities tend to get victimized. Apart from that, according to the Association for Democratic Reforms, almost around 70% of the income of the political parties comes from the unaccounted sources. So obviously this was leading to a problem such as greater flow of black money, growth of crony capitalism, and this was going against a very foundation of Indian democracy. Hence, in order to address these multifaceted problems related to the funding of elections in case of India, the government introduced the concept of the electoral bonds in the year 2017. So how exactly do the electoral bonds work? Now let's say the corporate entities and individuals, if they want to make donation to the political party, then they can buy the electoral bonds from certain designated branches of State Bank of India. So these electoral bonds are also referred to as the bearer bonds. Now these electoral bonds as such cannot be bought by cash. Compulsorily they have to be bought only through various digital payments or the check. This is basically done in order to ensure that the black money does not come into the system. The electoral bonds has multiple denominations such as rupees 1000, rupees 10,000, 1 lakh, 10 lakh, 1 crores and so on. The minimum money which can be donated is rupees 1000, but there is no upper limit on the maximum donation to the political parties. So if a person or an entity wants to make donation, then he can buy the electoral bonds of rupees 1 crores multiple times in order to make the donations. So when a person buys an electoral bond, such an electoral bond would have to be redeemed by political party into its bank account within 15 days. That is why we say that the maturity period of the electoral bond is 15 days. And these electoral bonds can be used to provide donations only to those political parties which have secured at least 1% of the votes in the last conducted elections. This is basically done in order to ensure that non-serious political parties are not able to get the money through the electoral bonds. So if you look at the benefits associated with the electoral bonds, first and foremost, as highlighted before, these electoral bonds can be bought only through digital payments or check. So through this, we will be able to check the flow of black money. And since bank also follow the KYC norms, the black money of the individuals or the corporate entities is not used to donate to the political parties. Next important advantage here is when you make a donation to the electoral bonds, these donations remain anonymous. So the political parties as such would not get to know as to who has made the contribution. So such kind of anonymity associated with the electoral bonds would in turn prevent victimization of the peoples or the companies, and the people and the companies would be able to donate freely without any kind of fear. And thirdly, the electoral bonds are considered to be a much improved version over the earlier regime. Now, under the earlier regime, the individuals and companies were allowed to make donations to the political parties. But here, there was a catch. The catch here was when these donations were of more than rupees 20,000, only then the political parties were required to make such disclosures of the donations. On the other hand, if the companies or the individual made donations of a value less than rupees 20,000, then the political parties were not required to make the disclosures. Now what used to happen under the earlier regime was, now let's say a particular company was to make a donation of say rupees 1 crore. Now if this rupees 1 crore donation is made in bulk, then obviously the political party would be required to disclose the name of the company which has made the donation. But if this rupees 1 crore is divided into multiples of rupees 19,999, which is 1 rupee below rupees 20,000, then the political party here will not be required to disclose the company which has made these contributions. So under the earlier regime, it was quite easier for the companies to simply split their contributions into multiple amounts and give that money to the political party, and that money was not supposed to be disclosed by the political parties. Now at least we have a much better version over the earlier regime. Now we are able to capture all the necessary information such as who is donating the money, how much money is he donating, to which political party is he donating the money, for what purpose the money is being used by the political party, and so on. For example, the information related to donors, this is captured by the State Bank of India when he is buying the electoral bond. The funding received by the political party is captured by the Election Commission of India. So the political parties are required to submit their audited accounts to the Election Commission of India. And these audited accounts of the political parties should basically tell us as to how much of total political donations they have received from the various electoral bonds. So obviously, the electoral bond regime is an improved version over the earlier regime. In spite of this, there are still a number of concerns and challenges with respect to electoral bonds. For example, we have discussed that the anonymity associated with the electoral bonds is one of the biggest advantage. But this biggest advantage is also one of its biggest problems as well. This is so because when the people make donations to the political parties, we as individuals or we as citizens of India, we will not be aware as to which individual or which company have made contribution to the political parties. Now, for example, if I want to donate money to a political party which is working in the interest of farmers, I need to be sure that this political party has not received any kind of money or donation from the entities which are working against the interest of farmers. If this political party has received money from the entities which are working against the interest of farmers, then I as an individual would obviously not donate money to this political party. So I as an individual, I as a citizen of India needs to be aware as to which political party is getting money from which sources. And this in turn will enable me to exercise my right to vote in a fair and rational manner. So this was what the PIL filed by the Association for Democratic Reforms before the Supreme Court asked. This PIL basically wanted that we as individuals should know as to which political party has received money from which rich individuals and large corporate entities. However, the Supreme Court of India rejected this PIL on the grounds that people or the individuals as such can easily get to know this particular information by applying the match the following principle. So what exactly is this match the following principle? So as stated before, the political parties in India are required to submit their annual audited accounts to the Election Commission of India, wherein they are required to highlight as to how much of total contributions they have received from the electoral bonds. Similarly, both individuals as well as companies, they submit their accounts for filing of income tax. Now, for example, a company as such would have clearly mentioned in its profit and loss account as to how much money it has donated to various political parties. So if you match these contributions with these donations, then we would get to know as to who has made how much of contribution to a particular political party. So this is match the following principle. But this article here is saying that the match the following principle would not work on account of multiple reasons. First and foremost, carrying out this particular exercise is considered to be a highly time consuming and tedious exercise for a large number of individuals. Secondly, usually the political parties do not submit their audited accounts to the Election Commission of India on time. There is huge amount of delay in submission of annual audited accounts. So this in turn makes application of match the following principle quite difficult. Thirdly, even if the political parties submit their audited accounts to the Election Commission of India on time, this will not work because usually the political parties submit the consolidated amount of money which they have got in the form of electoral bonds. So rather than providing a breakup of how they have received money in the form of various electoral bonds, the political parties simply state as to what is the total amount of money which they have got from the electoral bonds. So this once again makes the application of the principle of match the following quite difficult. Then fourthly, the companies as well as individuals may not disclose the information related to how much money they have contributed to the political parties in their statements. So obviously, it is quite difficult to apply the match the following principle in order to ascertain as to which political party has received how much of funding from which entities. The next problem is that there is no upper limit on donation. So the companies as such have complete freedom to donate how much of money they would want to a political party. Earlier there was a restriction that only those companies which are in operation for the previous 3 years can donate money to the political party, but this restriction has been done away with. So this in turn provides a scope for the shell companies to be created. So once these shell companies are created, these shell companies can be used to route black money in the form of donations to various political parties. Nextly, earlier there was a restriction that the companies can donate only up to 7.5% of their average profits in the last 3 years. But even this restriction has been done away with. So earlier there was a cap or a limit on how much of profits can be donated by a company to the political parties. But now we have done away with this particular cap, which means that the companies now can donate their entire profits in the form of donation to the political parties. Apart from that, even the loss-making companies can also make donations to the political parties. And last problem is with respect to the FCRA amendment done by the Indian government. As of now, the foreign companies are not allowed to make contribution to various political parties. But if these foreign companies incorporate their subsidiaries in India, which means, let's say a particular foreign company is operating through a subsidiary based in India, then these subsidiaries of foreign companies, they can make donations to the political parties. Now, because of this particular provision, the foreign companies would be in a position to indirectly influence the policies of the government. So these are some of the concerns and challenges with respect to electoral bonds. With this, let us now take up the next article. The next article appears on page number 6 in the form of a lead article. The article is titled as America's Mistakes in Forever War. Post 9/11 attacks, US started the war in Afghanistan with a twofold objective of eliminating Al-Qaeda and its leader Osama bin Laden and to decimate Taliban. However, in spite of waging war for almost 20 years and spending more than $1 trillion, US has not been able to fulfill its stated objective. According to a number of sources, Taliban presently controls more than 50% of the Afghan territory. In this regard, this particular lead article basically discusses as to what mistakes has US committed in its war in Afghanistan. For example, the article highlights that Afghanistan has always been a graveyard of empires. What is this graveyard of empires? It basically says that in past or in the history, whenever any great empire has tried to bring Afghanistan into its fold, such a great empire has failed. Examples being UK as well as USSR. So this particular article highlights that at least USA should have realized from the mistakes committed by UK and USSR. Secondly, the article also highlights that US should have been more realistic in its war in Afghanistan rather than being over ambitious. For example, the article highlights that US should have stuck to its original goal of eliminating Al-Qaeda and its leader Osama bin Laden, and it should not have been over ambitious in decimating Taliban and bringing about a centralized democracy in Afghanistan. So basically this article highlights various mistakes committed by US in its war in Afghanistan. Apart from these aspects, one should also be aware about the peace deal signed between US and Taliban last year, wherein one should know as to what exactly is the peace deal, how this peace deal would benefit India, what are the various concerns with the peace deal, and so on. Now, all of these aspects have already been covered by me in the DNS dated 1st of March 2020. So you can go through this particular DNS in order to get a comprehensive understanding of the evolving situation in Afghanistan. With this, we have come to the end of today's discussion. Now let us have a look at the question for the day. The question here is, consider an example. Earlier you are able to buy 2 kg of rice at rupees 40. Later, due to increase in prices of rice, you are able to buy only 1 kg of rice at rupees 40. Which among the following economic terms best describes the above scenario? The options are inflation premium, inflation tax, inflationary momentum, and fiscal drag. The answer to the question that was asked in yesterday's DNS is option B,